Dear Ascending Family, over the last several weeks, I have been aware of a large universal gate structure coming into view in our solar system, which appears as a massive wheel with spiral spokes coming out from its center hub. It has recently become clear that this architecture is related to the consciousness corridors. This is how beings will be routed into their placements, or frequency match for the next cycle. What we are in consent with largely determines which corridor we go through, and which timeline we align with moving forward into the next cycle. There is no better position than to be aware that this movement through trans-time is happening, and be able to consciously participate with it by intending to move into the most positive and highest expression for yourself and others. As the bifurcation intensifies, many things will be exposed that offer a new opportunity to assess what we are in consent with. It is time to honestly assess what we are aligned with, and whether or not we are participating with any individuals, group consciousness, or energetic forces that are aligned to something else, and begin to reconcile the differences. Over the coming months, walls will be coming down that have kept the right hand from seeing what the left hand is doing. There will likely be micro and macro revelations that will make many people very uncomfortable, as they will no longer be able to deny a painful truth now in full view. In the coming months, if someone is faced with new information, which allows them to see that they had been participating in something destructive to humanity without their knowledge, what new choice do they make? Do they align to the law of one and say no more, withdrawing their consent? Or do they make a justification for going along with it for personal gain, moving from unconscious consent into conscious consent? Or are they so confused by the media psyops interfering with people's discernment that they cannot accurately assess what they are in consent with? This month we take a deeper look at consent and its relationship to living in balance with universal law, as well as the chimera effect, recently witnessed in someone living completely outside the law. As we move forward this year, it is very important to understand that planet Earth and her inhabitants are moving through a very turbulent time of collective consciousness transformation. We are undergoing another stage of core magnetic field shifting that radically elevates the magnetic tone resonance that emanates from the inner core of the planet. Because of how the magnetic field resonances connect with our brain's neural net and stations of consciousness, the 3D personality will lose coherence in its linear logical processing. Therefore, humanity is confronted with the necessity of adapting to the major changes occurring in their world, the modification of how they think, and what they believe to be true. The global brain is changing in relation to radical magnetic anomalies generated from quantum shifts in the spinning rotational axis, which is impacting our brain, thinking, and neurological processing. Drastic magnetic shifts give rise to the sensations of magnetic compression and compaction in matter that are very uncomfortable on the physical body. This year ends a 5-year cycle where windows of opportunity will arise for individuals as well as the collective consciousness, to make choices in the direction of their lives that are derived through their creation in the power of consent. In order to effectively take back control over our own mind, body, and spiritual consciousness, we will explore the meaning of consent, and the types of consent that are common in human language, as well as how consent is manufactured through deceptive forms of mass manipulation. Consent has direct applicability to the power of universal laws, and it is cleverly mimicked when used in legal contexts or in the shaping of cultural influences, which often differ greatly to obscure the everyday meaning. We need to be very aware of the engineering approach used in mind control practices that purposely manipulate people out of their informed consent. Like the methods used in media-based psychological operations and the related propaganda that is used to get the uninformed public to support ideas and agendas that explicitly benefit the controllers. Now and ongoing, it is of critical importance that we pay attention and are consciously aware of what we are in consent with. When we better understand what we are truly participating with, an informed and aware decision can be made. The global control agenda is designed to usurp the informed consent of the human public. This psychological operation is escalating in more aggressive ways so that people will be compromised to easily give away their consent. When people easily give away their personal consent to a structure, belief, or another person, it is easy to compromise and interfere with the intrinsic relationship that person has to their own inner soul and spirit. When we give up our rights to have informed consent in what we interact with, we lose our autonomy and even lose rights to own our body. Thus, it is up to us to place emphasis on accepting responsibility in our choices and actions, so that we never give up our personal consent to something outside of our own inner spiritual self's direct connection to the Godhead or Source. In this way, we can interact with many different structures in this world, collaborate with other people and in communities, but external things are never given authority over the direction of the higher self and relationship with God. This is what it means to be in this world, but not of this world. Our multidimensional consciousness exists outside of time, and when we are reconnected, we are able to hold witnessing way beyond the control matrix. The relationship with the inner core self and the highest expression of self as connected to the Godhead must be the highest priority in order to retain power over personal consent. This action unleashes the power of consent in universal law, preserving the rights for claiming self-sovereignty and assigning higher authority to the body, while being bombarded with 3D mind control tactics designed to manipulate consent away from all people. Cognitive dissonance. Currently, the Earth and all inhabitants are subjected to hidden and obvious mind control technologies, used to increase cognitive dissonance that socially engineer the collective consciousness consent to accept the death culture, in order to continue to accept world slavery and parasitism. Most people on Earth would not give their consent to be slaves or to be used for energy, so they are mind-controlled to stay in denial, survival, or escapism to avoid seeing this painful truth. Consumer marketing campaigns capitalize on cognitive dissonance by framing their advertising in such way that the easiest magical solution to reduce pain or discomfort from problems is to buy or support their product or propaganda. Through media bombardment, they consistently form positive associations to the negative behaviors of the death culture in order to increase cognitive dissonance in the way people think, which increases suggestibility and gullibility into programming. People that are highly suggestible are programmed in such ways that directly impact the unconscious formation of doublethink into socially acceptable belief systems. This is purposed to covertly, yet directly stimulate the unresolved conflicts in the instinctual and unconscious mind's reactions, eliminating critical thinking, common sense, consistency, and coherent thoughts. This way people are led to associate the negative belief systems being propagated, with the positive associations being programmed for them. When the actions or results of those associations are actually entirely negative and spiritually destructive to them. As an example, why would humanity endorse the death culture when its purpose is to enslave and kill members of the human race? This is cognitive dissonance in action, the deliberate ignoring and denial of the war over consciousness on the Earth in order to avoid conflicting thoughts. This further influences and shapes what the collective unconscious creates as the main value system in society, which reflect what type of external structures people have given away their consent to. Because money and materialism are highly valued by the masses, this is the area in which most people give away their power of consent. Doublethink produces lack of coherence and inconsistency in one's thoughts, which is similar to the state of cognitive dissonance. People that are mind-controlled with cognitive dissonance or doublethink, refuse to acknowledge what is in plain sight or right in front of their eyes in full evidence, because they are still clinging to denial and self-deception generated from fear and pain avoidance. Cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable tension that exists when holding two conflicting thoughts in the mind at the same time, or it is the tension that exists between the actions of the mind and the actions of the heart. It is the state of incoherence or inconsistency within our thinking, when conflicting thoughts surface into the mind and cannot be reconciled, clarified, or neutralized. Therefore, the state of cognitive dissonance, usually brought on by negative ego pathology, manifests as a range of psycho-emotional spiritual conflicts that impact the functioning of body, mind, heart, and spirit. Many people misplace their consent through the mental state of cognitive dissonance, because they do not know the core spiritual self, and thus their consent is given away through the confusion they have with conflicting belief systems. When a person makes decisions that are based in self-deception or group deception, they are basing their consent on the beliefs that the deception is true, or going along with the popular opinion because it's easier. This is the way to manufacture consent in the masses through the setup of the imposter. Because a person is consenting to something that represents itself or markets itself with propaganda, as something other than what it really is. When we believe manipulated lies as truth, we give up critical thinking, common sense, and intuition that help us make informed decisions about where we place consent. As an example, if we believe the Center for Disease Control is the medical authority given to preserve public health, and they recommend to doctors that 69 doses are scheduled for each child, we may give away parental consent for our children to be injected in harmful doses, over our own common sense and intuition. Do we believe the CDC demonstrates ethical conduct and is sincerely concerned about public health and serving the people, or are they a corporate shill? Are they profiting from the billions made by the pharmaceutical companies serving the negative alien agenda? Where has our consent and authority been placed in this circumstance, and what are the common sense reasons why we should be questioning it? Dissonance between the ego and heart. Cognitive dissonance happens commonly between the beliefs of the ego mind, and the core beliefs or truth that exists within evidential facts as considered through the open heart and spiritual intelligence. If we ignore our spirit, and go against our heart intelligence to give consent to the ego intelligence, we create cognitive dissonance in our thinking, which manifests as unresolved conflicts that generate energetic blocks in our pain body. These blocks are created when consciously aware of dissonance, or unconsciously reacting to dissonance through uncontrolled impulses. Dissonance or uncomfortable tension that we feel is very strong when we believe something about ourselves, and then perform an action that is against that belief. Dissonant-based tension and anxiety is much more powerful when there are conflicts about our self-image, who we believe we are, and what we identify with as our personality. The more dissonance, tension, or mental anxiety we feel, the more attachment and dependency we have to defining our self-image based upon those sets of beliefs. Mental anxiety produced from cognitive dissonance magnifies considerably in relation to how important the subject is to us and how much we identify with it. It also relates to how polarizing the opposing thoughts are that are in conflict within us, and our inability to rationalize, explain away, or resolve the conflict. This makes it clear that confirmation bias and self-justification through ego defense mechanisms are commonly used to explain away the conflicts, in order to make people feel instantly better. People will ignore evidence that is contrary to their own beliefs, in order to preserve their mental beliefs that have become important to their personality, and to avoid feeling the tension of conflicts. It takes personal dedication to honestly face internal conflicts in order to evolve past cognitive dissonance and into the higher clarity of discerning resonances. This means asking equally if we are being lied to through mass manipulation, or if we are lying to ourselves to avoid a painful truth. In either case, our consent is not in alignment to universal law, and we can feel this through our heart intelligence. In order to resolve mental tension and inner conflicts that results from cognitive dissonance, one must first recognize that they have the power to make different choices. In taking responsibility for the choices they make, they can learn to change the way they think and change their behavior in ways that restore coherence and consistency. In this way, By resolving or removing issues of cognitive dissonance, mental anxiety from inner conflicts, they become more coherent and consistent in their thoughts, which allow for better choices to be made with the power of their own consent. When people remain in cognitive dissonance and they refuse to take responsibility for their choices to resolve conflicts, the negative consequences of dissonance are that it attracts more dissonant or negative energies. Our thoughts shape our beliefs, which inform decisions about where to place consent. So the process of cognitive dissonance becomes the basis for how we evaluate situations and make decisions. It is the central mechanism by which we perceive or experience differences that we encounter in the world. Once we become more self-aware, we evolve beyond egoic levels of cognitive dissonance and into choices based on deep inner feelings of non-judgmental personal resonances, which is the higher sensory language of the heart and spiritual intelligence guidance system. Manipulation of consent. The agenda to increase cognitive dissonance in the way people think is purposely plotted to more easily manipulate the consent out of the individual and public. It allows people to perform actions and behaviors that are actually contradictory to their personal belief systems. People that act in behaviors or ways that are actually the opposite of what they believe in, generate a lot of mental anxiety and accumulate emotional aberrance into their pain body. Emotional aberrance, unresolved conflicts, inner violence, fear, and pain, attract energetic parasites. Many times these parasites contribute to the psychological manipulation of fear in the person's body. As a result, in order to avoid facing pain or discomfort, the person may refuse to address the contradiction that occurs between their behaviors and belief system. So they put up a wall and avoid confronting it entirely. When a person lives in perpetual cognitive dissonance, the mental and emotional stress that it creates leads to splitting behaviors and soul fracturing. These dissonant thought forms and the internal fracturing are used to manipulate the consent of the masses to keep them spiritually oppressed, feeding into destructive structures they do not understand that harbor anti-human forces that act as parasites to the human body. What we hold as the intention made behind our personal thoughts is what we hold as our power of consent, in participating with that thought form and its vibrational quality and force. The consent is within the choices we make. Choices can be made via cognitive dissonance with discordant energies, or made through coherent systems of energy with congruent thought forms. If we make personal consent with something based on what we believe it to be on the surface appearances, but underneath the surface it represents something that is a deception or is contradictory to our belief, the energy behind it is really what we are participating with as our consent. However, when we are committed to serve our highest expression, these deceptions will be revealed to each and every one of us at some point. In that moment, we have the power to make a choice. Will we make the changes required that are congruent with this new realization, or will we compromise our integrity and pretend to not see it? Some people choose to live in denial because they don't want to change or evolve. Currently, with the bifurcation shift and the opening of the consciousness corridors, many people are aligning to the new timeline based on what they choose to be in consent with. This phase may feel very out of sync or change day-to-day relationships, because people are aligning to timelines based on their everyday choices. Some of those choices may be on our timeline or not. This creates a strange and surreal experience when interacting with people on Earth that are not on your same timeline, and one will feel the challenges increasing when trying to communicate with people that are not on your timeline. Communication lines between people on different timelines and reality bubbles are made difficult now. Through the exploitation of universal laws on the Earth, the negative alien agenda have manipulated humanity through mind control to be in consent and authority with their agendas. As an intermediary, they have shaped human culture, they have designed the curriculum humans are taught as the false history in the false reality. Based on these many lies and deceptions, Humanity naturally aligns with the consent and authority of that same predator mind that is manufacturing the deceptions. This is how the negative alien agenda control humanity by manipulation of consent in the mind, by removing the possibility of holding clear intention of thoughts, while further stimulating automatic reactions in the unconscious, which manipulates the soul. This makes the negative alien agenda false gods an intermediary source field, an imposter spirit, or artificial intelligent brain, that is communicating en masse with many unsuspecting humans who cannot discern the difference between lies, deception, manipulation, and the hidden kernels of truth, the content we must decipher to make accurate assessments about this reality. The consent we have made constitutes a personal choice. As a result of cause and effect, there are consequences from the thought form substance created, that impact the self and others. Consent naturally leads to what and who has been given some power or authority over the individual and the individual's body. Therefore, educating ourselves about the nature of consent is critical to the preservation of our self-determination and self-sovereignty. What is consent? Consent is an act of the power of the mind to think and understand, to reason and perform careful consideration of participation with something, and to reflect on the consequences of that participation. The proper meaning of consent is a person who exercises sufficient mental capacity to make an intelligent decision that is demonstrated through the genuine willingness of an action, as the result of reaching an agreement in mutual or shared interests, or performing an action that is proposed by another. Consent is not real consent any longer when tactics of terror, intimidation, deception, and fear are used as an explicit tool to manufacture consent in a person, in order to get them to go along with performing an action. Obviously, this is coercion administered under threat of personal harm. Thus, we can be made aware that many people's consent is stolen, manipulated, and manufactured through the specific psychological targeting of the masses with intimidation, bullying, terrorism, and victimization fears. This is a mass media psychological operation used to traumatize the world's citizens, distracting them from comprehending the power of consent. Additionally, consent occurs when one person voluntarily agrees to the proposal, goals, or desires of another person. This also applies to participating with any kind of organization and other types of corporate structures. When we are in consent with something, no matter what it is, a person or an animate thing, it is important to set your intention, purpose, and goals in why you are consciously participating with them. This is called setting the terms of a mission statement, which correlates to the law of intent. All individuals should have a mission statement that reflects their intentions and self-goals, no matter how basic it is, to outline their purpose and direction. People need to be self-aware to the point that they can define what purpose they want to serve in life. A personal mission statement can be as simple as I choose to be in the highest expression of my divinity and to serve my God source in reaching my highest potential. Furthermore, all organizations and systems of energy should also have a mission statement that clearly reflects the declaration of intent and the purpose of the organizational structure. Mission statements set the intention of the organizational field and the systems of energy being co-created, which will allow you, over time, to self-assess and monitor if your mission statement and the mission statement and intent of another are congruent or dissonant. As a conscious, awake and informed person, this step is very important in managing the energies generated between all of your personal associations, projects, and the intentions behind them. With this clarity of purpose, this allows you to check in for personal resonance quickly when things between people and organizations evolve over time, to better monitor if you need to make changes in the intent or consent that you have made in the relationships that you have created. Implied consent. Implied consent is dependent on the circumstances that exist, which lead a reasonable person to believe that this consent was given, although no direct or explicit words of consent or agreement had been actually written or expressed. Implied consent is based on the person's behaviors or actions in a particular situation or surroundings. An example of implied consent is that if you are participating with a larger institution, such as an educational institution, these places are mechanisms of social order which govern the behavior of the individuals that exist within that community. Implied consent would mean that if you choose to participate with that institution, you are expected to follow their rules. In gaining access to the energetic synthesis community as a learning environment based upon the law of one, implied consent would be that our members are in agreement to follow the guidelines of behavior that are outlined and are in consent with the practices of the law of one. For someone governed by another guideline of behavior or belief system that is contradictory to the main practices, it would generate cognitive dissonance if they were to actually become a member. However, this area of loosely interpreting implied consent is perhaps the most manipulated by imposter spirits in order to gain manufactured consent over unaware people. This is especially so for those people that have addiction and escapist tendencies masked by unresolved pain and trauma. If we have not been educated to understand that if we engage with unhealthy or negative behaviors, when we engage in those behaviors, we can open our aura to demonic attachments and negative spirits without realizing it. This happens through the consent we have made by engaging in that negative behavior, even though we may not have given express or written consent to have a demonic attachment. Our unhealthy spiritual behavior is the implied consent that is given to the world of dark forces, which allows them to manipulate, control, attach, or siphon your energy while making you feel miserable. When a person repeatedly acts against their soul or they are victimized by a violent entity using another person to commit harm against the soul, this leaves demonic bindings and other dark residue. The most common dramatic examples of assorted spiritual attachments and demonic forces hanging on to a person's auric field are the religiously conflicted, sexually assaulted, emotionally traumatized, any victim of violence or satanic ritual abuse, and the excessively mind-controlled or soul-fractured. To begin to heal from any of these spiritually abusive issues, the person must learn about the laws of intent, consent, and authority, so they can begin to make informed consent to reclaim their body, and energetically heal from severe spiritual abuses that have fractured the consciousness and light body. This is why, in personal situations, we should avoid implied consent with people we do not know well, and make sure that we have a direct verbal conversation or agreement that is discussed between the parties involved. Open and clear communication between people maintains clarity in each person's intentions, in order to avoid misunderstandings of what may be construed as implied consent. Informed consent. Informed consent is a legal term and ethical principle that describes biological ethics. It was introduced after World War II and it replaced the earlier medical attitudes that were founded on having implicit trust in a doctor's decisions, and put patients in charge of their own care. Informed consent is the process for getting permission before involving that person in some kind of situation that impacts bodily health or well-being, usually related to medical research or clinical experiments, such as being informed of the potential risks of a therapy or drug, and giving informed consent before being provided it. Informed consent can be said to be given when a person has been educated to understand the facts and considers the implication and possible consequences of an action, which will impact them. Therefore, the term informed consent is an ethical and legal principle in which a person exercises their right to gather more data for analysis and perform their own due diligence, to better understand the facts and consequences of making a choice that impacts them. Informed consent is directly related to preserving a human being's right to self-ownership, autonomy, and the prevention of abusive conduct. However, a person may verbally agree to something from fear, perceived social pressure, or psychological difficulty in expressing true feelings. A person may claim to understand the implications of some action, but in fact has failed to understand the possible consequences fully. However, Legally defined valid informed consent has three components: disclosure of the information in a truthful way to make an autonomous decision, the mental capacity to comprehend the information and form reasonable judgments on the consequences, and the voluntary action to exercise decisions without external pressures such as coercion, manipulation, and deception. These three core principles of informed consent are important to understand as they correlate to the tipping point that must be reached for the human collective consciousness to be awakened into the thresholds of accepting the higher frequency reality. As more people can comprehend their personal rights in universal law, they can exert that personal power to become more flexible and open to receive the clarity around the larger unpleasant truth behind world events. As they begin to perceive more of the true nature of reality pushing past denial and fear, they rise to support the collective human demands for full disclosure, demanding to know the truth, no matter how ugly it is. When people go beyond fear and denial, and stand up for the ethical treatment of humanity and the earth, they are willing to accept responsibility, petitioning for the truth to be known as based in universal laws. And this directly applies to examining evidence and continually asking for informed consent in everything that impacts our mind, body, and spirit, and in our world. Informed consent was implemented into the medical system when the scientific research conducted in Nazi Germany was discovered, and contained some of the worst human rights abuses and crimes made against humanity. This is an important distinction, to connect the creation of the informed consent culture in our society, to the actions behind the Nazi Black Sun agendas. This timeline is when the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars was declared in collaboration with some of the off-planet breakaways, and the extradimensional parasites. The same controller factions are busy destroying informed consent in every way possible today, and distracting the masses to ignore its deeper meaning, which is to serve and protect personal autonomy. The Nuremberg Code was established in 1949, for the purpose of developing standards by which to judge the Nazi scientists and doctors during the Nuremberg trials. The Nuremberg Code states that all who are participating in such an experiment are required to give voluntary consent that is free of coercion, fraud, duress, or deceit. Informed consent is an extremely important marker for guiding the ethical principles necessary to the creation of a humanitarian-based society, and is relevant in all segments of society impacting human rights, sexual ethics, business ethics, biotech ethics, and political ethics. It is the primary ethical principle and philosophy to prevent rampant corruption that harbors abusive conduct that allows lies, deceit, intimidation, and partial disclosure of the facts that innately steal away the consent of the people. Given the importance of informed consent for the protection of human rights and as an ethical doctrine, it is applicable to universal laws in the petition of demanding factual truths of accurate events to be revealed to the human population in the event of full disclosure. At this time on the planet Earth, in the larger global events designed for world slavery and extradimensional entities' genocidal agendas, informed consent in this larger context is non-existent. Therefore, all people interested to serve the disclosure movement can benefit through the comprehension of the higher principles of informed consent and the lack thereof, to open dialogue on the ethical implications this has made against the human race, as the demand for full disclosure grows stronger and becomes more unified. At this point, the lack of informed consent as the result of non-disclosure of true and accurate events on this planet, establishes gross negligent abuse, which can directly lead to multiple species genetic annihilation, as well as other devastating consequences. The law of intent and consent. Remember that intent matches the consent, which chooses the authority that is given in the circumstance or structure being created. When you create something, think about what is the intent, consent, and where is the authority being given in this situation. Whatever kind of force we are in consent with, whether we know this or not, is the quality of energy that our body and consciousness is subjected to in universal law. The quality of spiritual force will have corresponding dimensional laws, which govern the actions of that quality of that spirit. Negative forces are in the lower dimensions and create servitude and bondage to time, while positive forces of the spirits of Christ are in the highest dimensions and create sovereignty and freedom for the soul and spirit. What we think with our intent will be in consent with the frequency match of the forces that we generate, and the force we create with is our authority in the structure that we are building. What we build in the law of structure is what we have created with accumulated or combined forces. This creation, whether perceived as tangible or intangible, will have an energetic cause and effect upon our body, mind, consciousness, and all of our life experiences. When one has the knowledge of the law of intent, they naturally develop their consent with whatever energy, force, or structure they are interacting with or co-creating with. That force of energy, whether positive or negative, is used to create a structure, and that will determine the authority with which that structure has been built. As long as that structure has been built with that same intent, consent, and authority, it will remain as the governor of that structure. This lack of knowledge is the most common reason why an individual that has unknowingly co-created with the negative causes, that are the imposter spirit forces, becomes increasingly entangled with these negative forces, creating more negative results from the law of cause and effect. Many people cannot discern negative forces and the levels of deception carried out by the imposter spirits. This is a loophole created from the alien machinery and its inorganic artificial intelligent architecture, that has manipulated human beings to co-create with these negative forces, in order to grow and spread their negative effects on the earth plane and in other dimensions. Witnessing the harm committed. During this year and ongoing, many of us will be put in situations where transparency is required, making a choice of personal consent is necessary, and we will come to witness many different levels of harm that have been perpetrated over eons of time. The most challenging aspect we are facing is that we will be given the opportunity to see up close and personal, the inhumane treatment, the deliberate brutality and torture that humans have been subjected to by the choices that have been made by others, whether human or non-human and for whatever reason. How many people have refused to look at where intentional harm is occurring because it is believed to be too ugly and dark, and yet in silence, continue to allow the slavery or torture of humanity and children to continue unchallenged and left unaccountable. The world power structures, the governments of this earth have monetized the suffering and torture of humanity. The world economy is dependent on the suffering and slavery of humans, in order to produce mass profits based in the continual complicit behaviors of engaging in criminal conduct and inhumane treatment. Many of the storefronts or shill organizations are dressed up and labeling themselves as serving humanitarian causes, receiving massive amounts of contribution money that is not given to the people that need help, but instead to the corporations that make massive profits from disasters and war. Multinational child service charities connected to powerful politics that are so compartmentalized that they secretly are fronting massively profitable pedophilia rings. Therefore, we will be faced with making choices of consent in what we are willing to know, as the ugly truth that exists in the hidden situations impacting our lives surfaces into our view. More of the large pieces will be connected in perceiving what happens in the macrocosm that is impacting us directly by trickling down into our own living rooms. Are we willing to see what it is that really operates behind the world economies? What kind of people and storefronts are used to continually perpetrate harm, and how that degeneracy impacts every structure that exists in this world? Or will we refuse to see it and deny the harm it produces? Humans are at a crossroads of making the choices to become more ethical, to stop allowing the lies of omission, and to live in congruence with our spiritual source and higher values. During this phase, we will be led to remember our true nature as empathic humans, so that we can learn to live in harmlessness, in any way we can in current society. Thus, The quickest way to evolve and clear energetic imbalance is to be of genuine service to others and attempt to show sincere kindness and harmlessness to everyone. Chimera effect. To illustrate the absolutely critical nature of comprehending where we place our intent and consent, and to be aware of what kind of vibrational forces we are allowing our body to express through thoughts, behaviors, and actions, we are explaining the chimera effect. Interspecies hybrids and chimera are entities created from the mixing of two or more different species. Genetic chimeras can be produced in humans when a single body composed of cells belonging to one distinct genetic species is intermixed in the bloodstream with the cells of another genetic species. Chimeras are not specifically hybrids. The condition is acquired through the infusion and mixing of cellular blood components, or hematopoietic cells during transplantation, or transfusion, or direct injection into the bloodstream, which genetically modify the cells of a human body. This gives great clues as to why we should not allow the cells of another species to be injected into the bloodstream of any human being, as is being done in military experiments and with vaccinations. A faction of soulless non-corporeal shape-shifting entities that are fighting for maintaining their control access in the Earth and human energy fields, are called the Chimera Group. Chimera entities, like many of the negative alien agenda groups, are vicious extra-dimensional parasites that worship the Black Sun, and can only exist by finding a host from which to siphon energy. The higher ranks of Chimera Group are used by the Draco Black Suns to administer or monitor the phantom areas of hyperdimensional pockets and certain sections of the black magic grids, or frequency fences they placed in the Earth body. Some of these chimera entities are contained in genetics laboratory in underground sections of military bases, those that are known for genetic experiments, cloning, and time-jumping experiments. There have been positive forces that are working to stop the Chimera Group's cloning programs, especially of public figures, and this is in a heated battle. As a result, the Chimera Group have instead taken to inhabit human bodies on the Earth's surface, that they have prepared to have a close enough vibrational match for takeover. The profile for match includes an assortment of interspecies mixing with the blood, satanic orientation towards artificial intelligence signaling or assimilation, combined with exposures to extremely violent and depraved images that elicit uncontrollable violent impulses in their human target. During this phase of consciousness evolution on planet Earth, there is the combining of the dual aspect of the spiritualization of the body and the corporealization of the spirit into the matter world. As these forces of the spirit or other realms may become corporeal through an access to the human body in the matter realm, the human body can become fixed and consubstantial with it through matched vibrational resonances. To be consubstantial with something is to be identified, associated, and enmeshed with it, at energetic and cellular levels of existence. If we are not aware of our negative thoughts and actions, we may become consubstantial with the vibration of negative forces without realizing it. Extremely negative thoughts damage the nervous system and brain, such as expressing rage, violence, hatred, and the desire to kill and enslave, which attract not only demonic spirits, but extra-dimensional parasites that want to harvest the emotional energy being generated from that body. Currently, people on Earth are being energetically assaulted and exposed to levels of extreme violence and depravity that are being broadcast by not only the media, but through all aspects of the popular culture. The agenda is to mainstream Satanism throughout all of the popular culture, which prepares the terrain for people to become consubstantial with extremely negative forces, as well as connect them to satanic-controlled parasites that want to trade places with the human host. When a person has been exposed to conditions of genetic chimerism, combined with consistent bombardment to extreme violence and depravity, when they act out any of these violent behaviors, it stimulates the chimera parasite to gain complete access to enter the human body. This is to say, if a person is acting out extremely negative behaviors that can be defined as Satanism, it is now possible, Due to their consent with expressing these forces, that person loses autonomy over their body. Trading places with the satanic parasite, which repels the original soul and replaces itself within the human body. When it enters the human body, the DNA and blood is altered forever. This is the chimera effect. The chimera shapeshifter explains the consequence of a human body that appears to be human, but it is not human, because the soul has been ejected or harvested in such way to use the body like a virtual avatar. Because the body will expire shortly, generally the chimera parasite has to continually kill or feed on something to prolong its ability to use the body without detection or decay. The chimera group are extremely technologically advanced in that they have programmed holographic quantum realities that hack genetic codes or programming code. This chimera signature appears to have been behind increasing military testing programs for neurotechnology, such as surface brain mapping and mind uploading for weapons, also used for the purposes to modify genetic material to gain access to human bodies more easily. The infrastructure was laid in neurotechnological brain mapping and artificial intelligence, to record and transmit extreme violence and depravity in every way, through the popular culture to the brain and central nervous system of the human population, in order to help facilitate the chimera body snatches. This is designed to incite violence in such way that it traumatizes the central nervous system. People shut down, the soul body is fractured and repelled, and the dark spiral exposes them to depraved violence, in order to record it in their central nervous system, brain, and further deteriorate and destroy the original human DNA. Once a combination of these factors occur, it is possible for body trading to transpire, and these people are incited into uncontrollable impulses to commit the same violent actions they have watched on television, movies, mind-controlled as full automaton possessions carried out by these parasites. Recently, the chimera effect was shown to me in a violent male subject on the West Coast, as a means to identify chimera signatures. This is a very complex situation and it is not meant to instill fear, it is meant to inform the exact means through which the chimera effect can occur. Staying away from practicing Satanism or engaging in seriously violent actions will protect your body from this parasitism, as well as committing to connect directly with your inner spirit, practicing unconditional love, harmlessness, and empathy. This is a time to be vigilant about what we are in consent with. The law of one comprises the necessary principles of behavior, practices, and belief systems that humanity is required to learn in order to achieve spiritual freedom and sovereignty. It is what will protect the human body and serve all of humanity. Please only take what is useful for your spiritual growth and discard all the rest. Thank you for your courage and bravery to be a truth seeker. I am God, sovereign, free. Until next, stay in the luminosity of your avatar Christos Sophia heart path. Please be kind to yourself and each other. With a loving heart, Lisa.